Oh hey, I learned the color theory quite recently, and something's not right. It's not that the green's out of place, it's just not doing anything.
Console exclusives are everywhere. The irony. Don't you just love it when you want to play the specific game but then you realize that you need to pay your entire life for a video game console to which that game is exclusive to, and that your two other options are either watch the gameplay of that game or try to play that game on your PC until you realize your PC can barely run it?
I love gaming.
Console exclusives have been a thing since the very beginning. These things exist for the sake of competition between each video game console. The Atari 2600 had a fair line of exclusives: Adventure, Space Invaders, E.T. Oh no, the game industry crashed. The competition between console exclusives during the early age of video games wasn't as intense compared to the status of now, especially since every game back then looked and played completely the same. Squint your eyes and tell me which game is Centipede, they're both Starfield. But the competition just got even better with the release of the Nintendo Entertainment System and the Sega Master System. Now, there were other rival video game consoles at the time, but these two were the only ones that stand out the most. Both consoles have actual video game exclusives. The NES had Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, Kirby's Adventure, Excitebike, and Punch-Out! Meanwhile, the Master System had Phantasy Star, Mickey Mouse Castle of Illusion, Golden Axe Warrior, and the dumbed-down version of Sonic the Hedgehog. It was also around this time when each console had its own unique branding on the packaging and the cartridges of their exclusive titles. The first few NES games came with the iconic black box design, which later evolved into a seal signifying that this game is exclusive to the NES, while also allowing more of the artwork to shine. Sega just said fuck it and slapped a bunch of stickers on the graphing paper. Moving to the next generation of gaming, things got a whole lot hotter. The competition between Nintendo and Sega during this time was intense. Most of the marketing for these guys basically keeps saying, yeah, that guy can't do that, I can do that. It's basically a never-ending cycle of one side trying to one-up the other. Just stay in the corner, Atari. At this point in time, both Nintendo and Sega had finally found their mascots. Mario became a staple of the Nintendo brand and got tons of spin-off titles on the SNES. Sonic quickly became popular and got the same treatment as Mario, becoming a part of the Sega brand and receiving multiple titles on the Genesis. Now, it became quite clear to the general audience which video game titles are exclusive to which video game console, unlike the early days when console exclusivity was barely given enough care and every game looked identical to one another. In the next generation, the PlayStation was released, and with it were some of the most iconic PlayStation mascots. Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, Metal Gear, and Gran Turismo. Heck, Final Fantasy, which was formerly exclusive to Nintendo consoles, moved to the PlayStation and became another staple of the PlayStation brand due to the Nintendo 64's graphical limits. The same thing happened in the next generation with the release of the Xbox and Microsoft buying Rare, a game development company that made numerous titles throughout the SNES and N64. This was one of the greatest generations for gaming, back when we had 4 major competitors instead of 3. The PlayStation 2, Xbox, GameCube, and the Dreamcast. Each console here has some of the greatest games you could ever play. It's a shame that Sega stopped making video game consoles, but at least they ended on a high note, and I think it's for the best of the company. With that being said, this means that every game developed and published by Sega then and now must be pushed to their former rivals. This was a big deal, especially since Nintendo and Sega had a huge beef back then. Eventually, Sega published games on all 3 consoles and partnered with Nintendo to create one of the best video game franchises of all time. At one point, I know the sentence has been said before. As the years passed, the competition between the 3 remaining companies has more or less stayed the same, with Nintendo and Sega introducing tons of new IPs and Xbox debating whether layoffs are good or not. Now, that's the history of console exclusives. No matter what you say about them, they have a huge impact on the video game industry, not only for the competition but for each video game company to stand out. Without a single exclusive title for representation, the video game console will barely matter. Now, for the general audience, console exclusives don't mean much, but somehow there is a generous amount of people who depend their lives on it. I cannot understand these people. I mean, I can understand what they're getting at, but saying that the console or game that they're defending is 100 times better than the other without even trying the thing that they're comparing to is just childish. Console fanboys are the worst. I wouldn't even count them as part of the gaming community. They're like old men debating which brand of cigarettes is better. Like, okay, I can somewhat understand you, but you're going to die either way. They just defeat the purpose of gaming. Gaming isn't meant to feel better about your voice. It is to make sure every second you spend in a game is worth more than what you paid for. If you can't enjoy that, what are you even doing? Comparing video game consoles is worthless, but they're fun. That's why console wars were some of the most enjoyable moments in gaming. But now it barely means anything. Games and consoles have gotten so advanced to the point where graphics can only go so far now, and the only way your games can look better and unique is through the art style. The only selling point left for video game consoles is the gameplay included in its console exclusives, no longer the graphics. It seems like nowadays the main driving point for most AAA exclusive titles is the capabilities of their respective systems. And while that was true ever since the first few generations of gaming, with the graphics barely advancing or changing before our eyes, it's pretty pointless today. Now the only thing that makes games stand out is their gameplay and visual design, and even then, creativity is limited by the higher-up sense's desire to put paywalls behind each nook and cranny in each game. Another problem I have is the amount of old exclusive video game franchises these companies keep abandoning. While making new and original titles is fine, you cannot deny that these old franchises still have an impact even to this day, and would leave a much greater impact if they return to this day. So many exclusive titles are left in the dust, and they are still better than the majority of games released in this current generation of gaming. Infamous, Sly Cooper, Punch-Out, Banjo-Kazooie, Conquer, Star Fox, F-Zero, Killer Instinct, all of these fantastic exclusive franchises, and not a single person who works in the big three bats an eye. Why? Most of the time, the only two ways you could play these old titles is either replaying them in their original form with the disc and console proper, or through emulation. The first method can be fairly pricey to deal with, especially if you don't have the original copy and the console. The second method, however, can be tricky, especially with Nintendo games. Nintendo just hates it when you play their old games. I cannot understand them. Sure, they're trying to protect the legality of their games, but I don't want to spend $10,000 to play Pokemon Heart Gold. None of these games are being manufactured anymore or even re-released for newer systems. The only way you could play these older titles is through emulation, and they're trying to take it down badly. The last thing I want to talk about regarding console exclusives is the fact that most of them get ported to PC later down the line. That just defeats the whole purpose of calling them console exclusives. What's the point of console exclusives if they just get ported to another system? To be fair, the number of people playing on PC has risen tremendously, so it would make sense to port these titles to those systems. But then again, your PC may or may not be able to run it. Even if it could, it would not look like the version that's played on the original console. The only reason you would purchase and play these ports is either that your PC can run games on God mode graphics, for mods, or the more obvious reason, getting down on your knees and satisfying the video game console it came from. I seriously hate console fanboys. Not a lot of people even have the equipment to play these ports, especially the newer titles with graphics that can turn your PC into a clean engine. That's why top games on PC are games that were made for PC, never usually the ports from other consoles. Some ports do work well on PC, but just not all of them. It's even more humiliating if all of your console exclusives are eventually ported to PC, leaving you no more exclusives or justification to buy your console. This is why console exclusives are important. They exist to keep these video game companies up and running, not as excuses to make more money than they need to. These companies need to value their key video game franchises because it had importance and impact on their brand. That's why Halo remains a vital role on the Xbox brand, why Astrobot won Game of the Year, and why Nintendo hates piracy.
Not only are green and blue becoming worthless, they want to be worthless.